Thank you so much. We're so lucky to have Ambassador Julieta Noyes here, who is a former ambassador, a senior career member of the Senior Foreign Service, and just a huge champion for diversity and inclusion at the State Department. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
I wanted to, just launch our conversation to get started and ask you about, what attracted you to diplomacy? Kind of where did you, did it start from when you were really little, or kind of did you fall into the career path, and how did it evolve?
Well, there's a story there, like there is for
please.
most people. I'm actually a first-generation American. My parents came to the United States from Cuba. They are originally Cuban refugees and came into the States as refugees. And so we grew up with a profound sense of gratitude to this country for taking in our family and for giving them an opportunity to make a new start. And so my dad actually was going to night school, getting his MBA while he and my mom got married quite young and had babies quite young. But then when I was 10 years old, my dad finished his MBA and got a job working for IBM, and we got transferred overseas. Wow. So he worked for IBM, which means I've been moved. And we went to live in Brazil. So I lived in Brazil till I was 13. We all lived in Brazil. And from there, we were transferred to Ecuador. So I had like my quinceañera in Ecuador and spent time in Ecuador. And around then, a lot of my friends were the children of other diplomats. I mean, my dad was corporate, but I had lots of friends who were kids from the diplomatic corps, and I started learning about what their parents did, and it just was a very attractive lifestyle. I already was enjoying living overseas, learning other languages and cultures and cuisines. And then again, with this overlying sense of gratitude to this country and wanting to pay back. So I decided very early, that like 15, that I wanted to be a Foreign Service officer. I went to college and signed up to take the exam as soon as I was ready. I went with several of my girlfriends to come take the Foreign Service exam, and lo and behold, I was the only one from my girlfriends from this group who passed the written exam. Wow. So then I got very nervous because I really had this sense of mission. It was almost a vocation to join the Foreign Service. But so I showed up for the oral examination, and I was really nervous because I was convinced at this point that I was gonna fail the exam because I wanted it so bad, and all my other super smart friends hadn't made it to that stage. So I show up for the exam just nervous as can be, and honestly, the nerves were so serious that at that point they probably would have tanked my chance of passing the exam. Oh, no. Except this cute guy walked in. So,
okay, this is definitely the first time this story has taken this turn. I love it.
This cute guy walks in, and I started flirting with him. He started flirting with me. And fast forward 30 plus years.
Oh, okay.
He passed the exam, I passed the exam. We've been married for over 30 years.
Wow.
And we had a tandem, what they call a tandem career, where you're both in the Foreign Service. We have 3 kids born in 3 countries. So it was quite a Foreign Service lifetime.
Oh my goodness. So you finding love, literally.
Literally found love. Literally found love.
Through the Foreign Service.
Yeah, it was like, we joke that the day that we met, the day that we took that oral exam, like on Wall Street, they have triple witching hour, right? Where all these different things come together, because on that day, our careers, our marriage, our children, all the places we were going to live, we had no idea, but fate had ordained that that day was the day of our destiny.
Amazing. Yeah. Wow. And really, when you think about your father and, doing night school and, joining at IBM and you living overseas at such a young age, you really became a diplomat probably at when you were a little kid, and seeing the world through a different lens already, not just as a first generation, but having traveled through Latin America. It's like you came into the Foreign Service already with almost a deep bench of experience, right?
It really was destiny, I think, and it was such a magnificent opportunity to repay this wonderful country for everything that it did for my family and for the family of so many other refugees and new arrivals, and it is something that we remain profoundly grateful for to this day.
And I think that's such a great part of the American story, which a lot of budding professionals or even folks in DC or in the Beltway have no idea how diverse the Foreign Service is, and not just in the first generation diplomats, but people who were refugees themselves who come from an amazing wealth of international experience and just feel such a deep commitment to the U.S., right?
Absolutely.
And I just love that your story is just so unique, but and yet in some way so relevant in the sense that there are so many other colleagues that we can say also had similar experiences, right? And inspirations.
A good friend of mine is a woman named Yuri Kim, who just went out to be our ambassador to Albania. And she is the first ever American ambassador from Guam. And she has, you know, sort of a similar story. And there are a lot of us around the State Department and the other foreign affairs agencies who have this profound desire to give thanks for what our country has done.
Absolutely. And so do you know, when you joined with your husband, and you know, decades ago now, and looking back as your career evolved, how did you feel that, you know, when you were deployed overseas or even coming back to the U.S., and maybe unique for you because you'd already lived overseas for so much of your life, but how did your identity evolve as you evolved in your career, and how did you, you know, being a daughter of immigrants, being first generation Cuban American, at a time when, you know, relatively few, I mean, we also interviewed Ambassador Gutierrez, and he himself also came in at a time when there were very few that looked like him. How was your experience in the Foreign Service?
Well, it was, it evolved, as you say. And, you know, when I came in, again, having grown up in a relatively traditional Latin family, and having grown up where my dad was the principal bread earner, and again, the traditional family. And I guess I brought some of those preconceptions with me. So when I first joined, again, with my husband, Nick, who is himself Hispanic American, Mexican mom and an American dad. But my thought at the time was sort of, oh, I'll do this. I love this job. I love this work. I'm very excited about this. But in the back of my head, there was this little voice sort of saying, oh, and someday he'll become an ambassador. And I never thought that it would be me. And lo and behold, you know, as we did the work and moved up, and you know, at first we did a lot of tours in Latin America because we both spoke Spanish, but sort of halfway through my career took a turn and ended up doing a number of assignments in Europe. And the world changed, and I changed, and I grew with it, and I wound up being the one who became an ambassador, and I wound up being ambassador to a country that did not exist when I first joined the Foreign Service.
Oh, which country?
Croatia.
Croatia.
Because
it
was Yugoslavia.
Yes,
I mean, I joined the Foreign Service during the
former
Cold War, toward
Yugoslavian
the end of the
Republic.
Cold War.
Exactly.
And it wound up being me, and sort of blew up my own preconceptions about what was possible, and that I think was made possible because of the State Department and our colleagues and a wonderful husband who was very supportive, but sort of turned everything upside down from what I first expected when I joined.
Yeah, what an experience. And did you find that in Latin America, especially having already lived there before, that your experience was different or similar to your experience in Europe? I mean, how was that as a Hispanic American officer? I mean, my limited experience having been in, you know, only 9 years, it's like every place sometimes has similarities and differences when they see, you know, a non-white male face as the Foreign Service officer. And so, but this is now where it's, you know, a lot more common, whereas, you know, I can only imagine you were one of the first ambassadors, maybe even one of the first female ambassadors to Croatia.
I was the first female ambassador to Croatia, I was. I think part of the fun of the experience was how it changed my own preconceptions, but also how it sort of changed the preconceptions of some of the people that I came into contact with. I remember one time when we were serving in Guatemala, and congratulations on your pregnancy.
Thank you.
But I remember serving in Guatemala where our first child was born, and I was about 7 months pregnant.
Yeah.
And I was a first tour political officer, and it was during the Contra Wars in Central America, and so we had this group of American sort of, you know, leftist activists showed up at the embassy, and they wanted to protest, and they demanded to see someone. And so the ambassador said, let's send Julieta down. So I go down, I waddle down there with my big old belly, and they say, we demand to see an American diplomat. And I said,
hi.
And they're like, no, an American diplomat. I'm like, that's me. But you're a girl. I said,
wow.
I am an American diplomat. And he said, but you're pregnant. I said, yeah, we have babies too. and they just didn't know what to do with it. So I sat down with them in the lobby, and they were just so deflated because they just desperately wanted to yell at like a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, right? And they got this like super pregnant young Latin woman, and it took all the wind out of their sails. So then I started asking them, so do you guys have a permit? They're like, well, we're going to go protest on the streets. I said, do you have a permit? Because if you don't, you can get arrested, and then we'll have to go visit you in jail. And so it flipped them around, and by the end they were like, oh, congratulations on the baby. So sometimes things happen that you don't expect, and you kind of can make people look at us in different ways.
Yeah, and that's hilarious that experience, I mean, it's not like the local people who have this reaction, but it's at our own American,
well,
you know.
It's the local people too. In this particular story, it was the Americans.
But that's hilarious because, because that could happen too, right? I mean, I think sometimes we forget as foreign service, because we spend so much of our time doing foreign service, that even when we come back into the U.S., it's, you know, explaining that we are the face of the U.S. overseas, and bridging those conversations is so important even now.
Yep.
But that story is amazing. And so kind of as you have come along, do you feel like, and I feel like, you know, we can kind of predict the answer here, but I would love your personal take, you know, how diversity and inclusion has evolved as even a thought process in the department, you know, since you first joined and now. I mean, we were, you know, before this talking about just promotion numbers or whatever, and, you know, how do you see, whether it's the Hispanic American foreign affairs community or just, you know, the diversity of writ large through the foreign affairs, you know, just community, how what has your experience been?
Oh, well, it's absolutely changed a lot. Since I joined. I remember another pregnancy example, but I remember when I joined, there was no family leave, right? There was no family leave whatsoever. So when you had babies, you took annual leave and sick leave, and that's it. And then you came back to work.
Yeah.
So I had my first baby in Guatemala after I encountered the protesters. And then I came back to Washington. I was working in Washington, and of course I had used up all my leave. And I got pregnant again. And so I had like very little leave saved up, maybe 4 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks saved up. And again, at that time, there was no parental leave. Yeah. But so the women, I was working in WHA, Western Hemisphere Affairs Bureau at the time, and the women of the Bureau all got together, and as a baby gift to me, they all donated leave. They donated their own annual leave so I could have 4 more weeks at home with my baby, which was the best gift, the absolute best gift. But it shows you kind of the solidarity that we have with our colleagues at the State Department, and how we look out for each other and take care of each other. And that was, I will never forget that gift. Amazing. But then fast forward a few years, and we got the Unpaid Family Leave Act, so that people could take up to 12 weeks, moms and dads. Of leave on the birth or adoption of a child. And on October 1st of this year, it's going to turn into paid family leave. Is it going to be in time for you?
No, not for me. But I'm glad that I was able to at least help be part of the advocacy process to get it for our next generation.
So that's huge. I mean, that's a really, really huge change. But there have been other changes. The department, I think very wisely, a few years back, I guess about 20 years ago, realized that all of the recruitment efforts
Yeah.
and all of the things that we were doing to try and bring in more women and minorities weren't achieving the results that we wanted
Right.
in order to have a more diverse foreign service. So they started up the Pickering and Wrangell program, and I'm delighted to have one of you here. And that has made a difference. In 20 years or so since the program started, we've seen an increase in the representation of minorities in the State Department go up to, I think, about 25%. And the representation of women foreign service officers. This isn't State Department across all employment categories, but in the foreign service generalist officers, women, previously had been somewhere in the neighborhood of 28% and now stand at around 40%. Where we're falling down, where we're not as well represented, is in the more senior ranks, because of course it takes time for people to move up through that pipeline. But slowly, steadily, we hope to get to a more equitable service.
And we thankfully have, amazing mentors and people to look up to like yourself, who are now at least at the senior level to even have conversations. I mean, we were talking about, this annual conference that the State Department has for chiefs of mission that will happen next week, and just convening all the different ambassadors from all around to then engage with the Corps is still so important, and we sometimes underestimate how important that is, and just maintaining the not just the mentorship, but just the sponsorship too. So I wanted to ask you, over the years, and we asked this to all of our kind of participants, because I think it's important to delineate the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, also something I actually learned only recently, and I've been in a little bit. And so, how has it been for you? Do you feel like you've had mentors and or sponsors who helped, shape you / bring you along the way that paved the way for your success?
Absolutely. I mean, we, our system, have been traditionally an organization, the Foreign Service as a whole, that has been built on the apprenticeship model. So you come in, you get some training, you go out to your first post, you do your first assignment, usually as a consular officer, then you move to your next assignment. Along the way, you meet people, you get to know people. For each of your subsequent assignments, you have to submit bids, put in your bid list, your request list. And it's really important to have people who are recommending you. It really is important to have people who are calling you to offer you positions. And so it really is critical to have people who are backing the quality of your work, recommending you for things, offering you positions, looking out for you when they know that it's your time to move, who can give you advice at different career junctures about, well, is this a good time to do a detail assignment, or is this a good time to open myself up for consideration for the senior foreign service, or do I need to wait a little longer? Who can kind of help guide you through the process of, okay, you want to throw your hat in to be an ambassador. How does that process work? And so, as it was with the women who donated all of that maternity leave for me, I have been the very grateful beneficiary of a lot of good career advice and mentorship and sponsorship throughout my career, and it's been something that I've tried very hard as I kind of made it through the ranks. Once I stopped being at the lower levels and I suddenly became them, because people always talk about, well, they decide and they do it. Well, now I'm they.
You're them.
Now I'm them. And it's important for them to help the folks who are coming up.
Right.
So that's something that's really been important for me.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, you were the first U.S. female ambassador to Croatia. I mean, what that was like to just even get your foot in the door to be considered. I mean, even now we talk about in the department that the process is still kind of opaque on like how the process works to be considered for a senior position. But now at least we even talk about it and it's part of the conversation. But I can only imagine when it was your turn that, how much was it even part of the conversation?
I was very grateful at the time, because when my name went forward, and there's a whole process where assistant secretaries nominate you and put your name forward, but I was really honored, because the assistant secretary who wanted me to go to Croatia was a woman who had been a strong mentor for me. And at the same time, there was another assistant secretary in another bureau who was also a woman who put me forward for a different post.
Oh, wow.
And as I understood it, I heard later that they sort of had an argument in the committee to see, you know, who would get me in the end.
Amazing.
But it was a real honor.
That is amazing. And so how about, you know, when you look at, you know, how you've over your career have had to, you know, take different policy stances depending on, you know, whatever the administration. I think it goes without saying that, you know, in the Foreign Service, you know, you serve at the pleasure of, you know, the president, and the policies change at every administration. But did you feel like at any moment over your career, like your identity and your experience had, you know, a certain perspective that you wanted to express, and then, you know, maybe were you able to express that opinion and express some kind of dissent without feeling that you were kind of an outsider? Because I think sometimes we talk a lot about this kind of feeling, especially as a woman or a person of color. You sometimes feel like even though you're at the table, you don't even sometimes feel like sometimes that you can voice your real opinion at the table. Did you ever feel like you had to, you know, hold yourself back from your opinion, or did you always feel like you could be unbridled in your perspective and the difference of maybe your perspectives that you brought, especially having already lived in Latin America before you even joined the Foreign Service?
So, as you mentioned at the outset, I'm the Deputy Director of the Foreign Service Institute, which is the diplomatic training academy for the State Department. And we have a saying, it's the Foreign Service Institute, we call it FSI. So we have a saying at FSI that the answer to practically every question is always 2 words. And those 2 words are, it depends. And
I was like,
yeah, you know that, you know those questions.
Always.
I think that the answer to the question that you just asked me is, it depends. There have been times, I'm not going to lie, where I felt like it was probably more prudent to keep my opinions to myself, or where I felt like if I did voice my opinions, they wouldn't fall on fallow ground.
Yeah.
There have been other times where I expressed my opinion even with some trepidation that it wouldn't be well received, and there have been other times where my opinion has been strongly solicited and strongly wanted.
Yeah.
So it really did depend on the issue, the situation, who I was engaging with, how urgent the matter was, what particular experience I brought to the table. And I suspect that maybe it was a little more pronounced, the it depends-ness was perhaps a little bit more pronounced because of being a woman, but I'm not sure. I think that's a really good question to ask, you know, white men who may come and sit in this chair, because I suspect that they've had situations like that and had to bite their tongue at times as well.
And I think that's actually like the lesson I think I keep gleaning from asking that question, because I think for so many of us first generation and or just, you know, being the minority in the room, we sometimes self-censor ourselves thinking that someone else might, you know, look at us a different way if we say whatever. But in actuality, everyone actually, you know, may be thinking it through in their head and then saying it. So it's us actually sometimes hindering ourselves just because of the nature of being, you know, one of the few women or whatever in the room. And so it's about kind of overcoming that even mental barrier. And so that kind of, for me, is a great segue to asking you, especially to students, but also just up and coming, you know, and I'm sure at FSI you talk about this all the time because it's about training the cadre of colleagues that we have who go out into so many different roles. You know, what kind of lessons or pieces of advice do you give them or to up and coming students who want to join the Foreign Service to, you know, as they join, you know, the 21st century and very different, diverse and inclusive place, but, you know, what kind of tricks do you share with them?
I had a mentor maybe halfway through my career. I had just been promoted. This male officer had selected me to be his deputy in a pretty important office up on the 7th floor where all of the where the secretary and the undersecretaries work up on the 7th floor. And so it was my first time working on the 7th floor. And I got up there and I was nervous. And I wanted to fit in, and I was trying very hard to sort of
do what everyone
fit the mold
yeah.
that I thought I needed to fit into.
Yeah.
And this this officer, who's gone on to an extremely distinguished career and is still in the career, so I won't mention who it is, but he told me that I needed to be myself, that I had to be authentically myself, that there was no such thing as one mold, that there were many molds, and that all of them had value and all of them could contribute. And so he made it okay for me to be goofy at times, because I can be very goofy at times. And he made it okay for me to, you know, as a Latin woman, you know, give hugs. And he told me, that's fine. Be who you are. People will react to who you are as opposed to who you think they want you to be. And by making it okay for me to be my authentic self and telling me that it was fine, I think I was able to thrive in that environment, and it really set me up for the steps that came later. And so that is always a piece of advice that I give to the people who I mentor is there's no one path. There's no one way of succeeding. You have to be who you are. You have to be true to yourself. You know, you have to uphold your oath of office. You have to do the job. You have to do the job well, but do it in your own way, because that's when you'll feel most comfortable, and that's when you'll be most successful.
That's great. I mean, I think that it's funny that I've heard this piece of advice so many times, and you internalize it, but then you forget that sometimes you don't actually apply it, and you have to like bring it back again. So it's always actually good as a needy reminder to so many of us who've been in the career for a long time. And sometimes you have to remember it's not what they think that it is. I think it's actually really important that you mentioned that as going into a senior position and or, you know, a prestigious position, as we like to say, on the 7th floor, because I think even once we get comfortable in the career, and I don't think it's just foreign affairs, I think any career in general, especially white collar careers, you get comfortable, but then you hit a point where as you start to rise, that like initial doubt that you had maybe when you first joined kind of creeps up again, and it's so trying to just adjust with that and constantly remember that you know you made it this far because of who you are, not because of what someone expects you to be. So those are great. Great points. And then I guess my last point is, any thoughts on kind of the future of diversity and inclusion in the foreign affairs community? Things that not just the State Department, but in general, the community could be doing better or has been doing, and we need to continue to maintain. Just would love your thoughts.
So the current head of our human resources, talent management, and the State Department is a woman, a friend,
great.
and she's fabulous.
She's so great.
And she's doing a number of really innovative and long overdue things to make the workforce, to make the workplace more welcoming and more flexible for the workforce. So doing things like getting the paid parental leave. She's done things like making the whole process of bidding much simpler, much less rigid in terms of rules that you have to follow. She has made it far easier for people to request extended leave without pay so that they can be with their family or their spouse. And she knows this because she came up herself through the ranks. She started out as a secretary back in the days when we still called them secretaries. That's how she started, as a secretary. Then she married a Foreign Service officer and was what we used to call a dependent, and now an eligible family member. So she worked as a family member, joined the Foreign Service herself. So she's walked a mile in the moccasins
I had no
of
idea.
a lot of these different folks. So she's doing a lot of really important things.
She really is.
And then I think there are programs of longstanding, like the ones that we talked about, the Pickering Wrangles, and certainly the State Department internship programs, things like that. But I would say that in addition to those sorts of initiatives and workplace flexibilities that we absolutely need in a 21st century workplace, it's also really important to see representation. To have people who are women and minorities, different ethnic backgrounds, different different races and genders, to have everyone represented in senior leadership positions.
Absolutely.
To serve as role models, yes, but also because they will bring different points of view to the table.
Exactly.
And those different points of view, when you get a lot of different points of view in a room,
Right.
you're going to be able to reach a better decision than if everyone in the room
Right.
is the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they may not understand different perspectives if everyone is kind of
Yeah.
a similar demographic background. So I think representation is really important, and it's something that I'll tell you at FSI, we joke sometimes because it's education, and education tends to be a field that a lot of women go into.
Yeah.
And so at FSI we have a preponderance of women employees. And so I joke about the fact that we really need to work on our diversity and hire more men. But it's true.
Yeah.
We do need to have more men so
I
that we
know.
have a better mix at the table.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's important.
That's hilarious. No, and actually the word on the street for most of us mid-level officers is that FSI is the place to be. And so, and especially amongst my female colleagues, we're all like, okay, how can we make sure that we can get a tour at FSI? Because not only do I do good work, but I also know that I have a supportive environment, there's good work-life balance. And so it's almost something to think about as a symbol or a mirror for the rest of the department. And some offices have come a long way and some still are trying to adjust.
Of course, I mean, you know, we do benefit from the fact that it's training, and training is
Yeah.
predictable. You don't
That's
tend
true.
to have as many crises as if you're
Yeah.
working, you know, the Yemen account or the
Coronavirus. Yeah.
where you're going to be putting in the hours because you're putting in the
You have to,
hours, because
yeah.
otherwise the the work doesn't meet the hours that you have
No.
to do it.
It's absolutely true.
So it is more predictable. And there are times in your careers where you're going to need a job like
Absolutely.
that. And there are other times in your career where you say, you know what, my kids are grown, or my
Yeah.
husband's home, or my wife's home. Like,
Yeah.
I can do those jobs that are
Yeah.
going to require the longer hours. And that's fine. But what is important for any organization is to have a mix of different kinds of jobs so that employees at different stages of their lives can have those options.
Absolutely. I mean, that is, on that note, I will leave it open for other questions that some of you all may have. So just give a second. If you have a question, the gentleman will pass the mic to you. So anybody have any questions? Please do not hesitate. You can be very, yeah, good. No. Yeah. We'll start here. Yeah, right there, and then we can go.
Hi, thank you so much for being with us today. I actually just came off the street. I saw it on Eventbrite, so I'm feeling really privileged to be in this space. I just graduated from Georgia State and moved here to work in D.C. in engagements for a media company, and I'm in the early stages of considering maybe a grad program in foreign service or in that space. Some of the hesitancies I've heard from different people in the space, that some things they've experienced is that, you know, some of the work-life balance in the sense of navigating career as a young woman, and some of the sacrifices that may have to be made. I'll hear you speak about mentors that have kind of guided you path by path about when it's a great time to take opportunities. I also hear about you at FSI kind of speaking about, you know, what stages you were based off the roles. What encouragement could you give to someone that was early considering this space, I guess in proximity to the challenges and the sacrifices that you've made?
So, super question. I think the Foreign Service is a fabulous lifestyle, absolutely wonderful lifestyle, and it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's also possible that it may be a really good lifestyle for you at a particular
Right.
time in your life, but then there are other times
Exactly.
when the sacrifice is inherent in moving overseas. If you've got aging parents or ailing parents, or a special needs kid, or a spouse who's not in the Foreign Service who has a fabulous job that they really don't want to leave, the lifestyle where you pack up everything that you own and put it into wooden crates and see it loaded onto a ship and moved somewhere, and then when you unpack it again 3 months later, it's like Christmas because you're getting all your stuff again, is really exciting and really rewarding, and it's a great opportunity to pay back your country. And, you know, living overseas is frequently really lovely, sometimes dangerous.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I had, when I was pregnant with one of my kids, I had amoebic dysentery, and I couldn't take the medicine for the amoebas because it would have been bad. So I was growing baby and amoebas at the same time. For many. So, these are some of the sacrifices.
Yeah.
For me, they were absolutely worth it, and it was a wonderful lifestyle. It's not for everyone all the time, but I would say give it a try. See if you like it, and then, and if you do, then boy, what an adventure. And if it's not for you, there's nothing that binds you to it permanently. But I'd say give it a try, because it really is an incredibly rewarding career and lifestyle.
She also is, Ambassador Noyes is so great at just encapsulating the current mindset, and as someone who joined 9 to 10 years ago, I'm so glad that now we have senior people who acknowledge that now for so many young aspiring professionals into this space, it's okay to say that it's not going to be a forever career, because sometimes it's not forever for everyone, because we all have different things that we juggle as we think about the sacrifices, and that's okay. But I think that's actually what makes us even more of an attractive and stronger organization, because we have some amazing senior folks who are saying, hey, these are the challenges, this is what I went through, but that doesn't mean you will go through the same thing, but give it a shot and see how it is. And I will say, in large part due to her mentioning her good friend and some senior colleague I look up to, our Director General, who's done so much to open up this space. A year or two ago, you couldn't maybe even have the conversation as widely as you could now about expanded opportunities to maybe take a year or two off and come back. I mean, how many organizations can you even actually, by the way, do that?
Not many.
Now you can even take maybe even up to 3 years off, where you just can take a break. People maybe sometimes they want to take a break because they're a little burnt out, and maybe they want to go back to school. So I have so many friends who are doing that. They are so looking forward to coming back to the department, but they recognize that they need that moment in their lives. And it's just actually another huge asset to our institution, and it's so great that we have that ability. So I just wanted to mention that it's also a great opportunity to join the institution because we've come a long way and we recognize that, and it makes us a huge, attractive place to work in and work for. But yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for coming. It's so encouraging and just motivating hearing you guys speak. I guess my question is, with the transitions of different administrations, do you feel that they understand the importance of bringing diversity into the State Department, and even with the Secretary of State, and just kind of helping them get on board to understand why these programs need to exist and support it?
So I think that all of our senior leadership, all of the Secretaries of State who I have worked for, and I can't remember how many secretaries I've worked for, but I've worked for 6 presidents now.
Wow.
There's always been some a commitment to diversity and to improving representation to make our service more representative and look more like America in general. Some administrations, some secretaries have done a bit better in terms of having senior folks who are more representative. It depends. Yeah. But I think that they have all recognized that it is important, and there's been strong support for things like the Pickering-Rangel fellowships and so forth. Yeah.
And even our newest Deputy Secretary Began, started out even from the beginning sending out correspondence to our colleagues to say that he's very dedicated, and I can sense from my own friends in the building that they feel his dedication to the diversity and inclusion. The actual implementation of it is a lot more challenging than it may seem to be, and I think that's even Secretary Pompeo. When I asked the same question to him, I think last year or 2 years ago, and he recognized, actually coming from the intelligence community, that it's actually, they have the same problem, and it's not just the State Department. And actually, I would argue as someone who have many friends in the tech industry, they actually even have it even worse in some parts of the private sector. But for us in government, we always want to make sure we represent the people, right? And so we want to make sure we look that way. But Secretary Pompeo actually gave a great remark to me, which was that, you know, he had been trying to work on this actually in the CIA and even now into the State Department. But some of this is pipeline stuff too. And so you don't see the workforce stats until like years later. And so we were talking about like in the past 10 years, well, now we can look back and say, oh, look at where the dips and the ebb and flow is. But what can we do to target that problem specifically? It takes a lot more work than I ever knew until I started working in this space too. But yeah, I think the commitment is clearly there. It's just a matter of now, how do we expand the initiatives and how do we increase the engagement? And this secretary has made it clear he wants to do more engagement with the American people all across the United States for them to also just know what we do. I think that's also part of attracting more diversity, right? So as Ambassador Gutierrez mentioned, when he goes back to Florida, sometimes just having that conversation with Floridians or in his home campus, or for me, when I go, I'm from New York, but my parents are in upstate New York, where literally if I go and I say I work for the State Department, they're like, what state? And so it's part of the conversation, right, about making sure our own American people know what we do, and so we can attract them at a young age to join the Foreign Service. Not to expand upon, but just another added point to what the ambassador was mentioning. Isaac, do you have a question?
Hi, thank you so much again for coming. I was just wondering if you'd speak a little bit about the challenges, but also the benefits of being a tandem couple.
Oh, yeah.
Oh. So the benefits and challenges of being a tandem couple. The benefits are 2 incomes. That's always a good one. It's also being able to come home at the end of the day and being able to unload about the latest stupidity or the latest frustration and have your spouse really get it. The challenges can be the difficulty sometimes of getting assignments together, and particularly in today's world where we have so many posts that are unaccompanied, and you can, if you're a couple without children, you can do those unaccompanied posts together. But once the babies come along, someone's going to have to stay with the babies. So these days we are seeing increasing numbers of families separated for different amounts of time. And you know what? That's tough for a family. My husband and I decided very early on that our priority, our career was important, but our priority was always going to be our family. And so we both, at different times in our careers, we both took leaves of absence, leave without pay, in order to keep the family together. So there are real advantages, but there are some drawbacks. You are going to have less flexibility in terms of where you can serve and how many different kinds of assignments you have. You tend to probably need to specialize more in a particular region or a particular area so that you get known, so that you can get those tandem assignments together. So we ended up doing Western Hemisphere and Europe, which was great. But boy, I would have loved to have served at some point in Nepal. I always wanted to serve in Nepal. That just wasn't possible because I didn't have the contacts in that bureau. But all in all, I think the sacrifices in terms of flexibility were more than outweighed by the advantages and the joys of being a family that always stayed together and moved from country to country together.
And my husband and I are now tandem, but we weren't when we first started. And it's exactly what the ambassador mentioned, which is, you know, it's great to have someone who understands all the acronyms and lingo. There is too much of them. And then on top of that, I think even if you're not a tandem, there is that level of, now we are in a generation where so many of us, you know, our partners, our spouses, you know, have their own career aspirations and ambitions, and so trying to juggle that. But I spent an entire tour, first evacuated and then separated from my spouse, and I learned through that experience that I can't do that again, right? And now I have babies, so it's not happening. But it is part of the conversation, and I think actually, like, even if you're a tandem or not, it's part of the Foreign Service, as we talked about sacrifices that you make. But it comes with amazing joys, but also comes with moments where you have to decide, you know, what is more important. And I follow the same camp as the ambassador. Family is always first. The career clearly worked out just fine for you. So I think the point, and it goes actually, kind of on the ending point, it's a great reminder that we feel so much in this line of work, or maybe even just in DC, the culture is like, go, go, go. And so you feel like, or as we say now, like FOMO, like fear of missing out. You think that like, oh, if I don't take this one assignment and I've been tapped for this and like this is the senior job that I know will set me up for the next thing, if I don't do this, but instead take some time and like spend it with my family, like it's just gonna go away and then I'm not gonna get that career progress that I was looking for. And lo and behold, you're doing okay.
I can tell you that there were different times when I was given the opportunity to have an assignment that was considered really career enhancing, but it would have involved ridiculous number of hours. I had little kids at the time, and so I did what at the time was called mommy tracking. So I mommy tracked myself, and I took positions that were challenging and rewarding and where I was able to contribute, but where I wasn't getting home at 9 p.m. every night because I wanted to get home and have dinner with my family. Did it slow me down? Yeah, probably. Do I care? Absolutely not. It was the right thing to do when I did it, and it all worked out in the end.
Yeah, see, and that is like the best lesson to take away from this, which is like, as someone who's in mid-level career, kind of mommy tracking, I guess. I finally now have a term for it. I love that is something to remember. That
there's no one path.
Yeah, there's no one path, and be yourself, and honestly follow what your gut and your ambition is. And I think in the end, as your family or your personal life evolves, you follow that as it happens, right? Any other last questions? Oh, yes, great. One last question.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
Sure.
I was curious what steps you think can be taken to ensure that the next generation, particularly minorities and first-generation folks, are still prideful like you were of the goals and missions of the United States.
I think that it's really important for all of us to remember that this is a long game, that sometimes you may be frustrated by a particular policy or by a particular situation, but those policies and situations change, and it's important at all times. After all, we swear an oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the United States, an oath that dates back to 1884 during the Civil War. I mean, you think about what the country was going through then, and that's where the oath of office originated. So we swear this oath, and we have to well and faithfully execute that oath and uphold the policies of the administration that we're serving in. But administrations change.
Absolutely.
And policies change, and it's absolutely the case that we have the ability to try and influence policy from our positions and to represent who we are and take pride in what we're doing, even if we don't agree with everything. And I can tell you, I have worked under 6 presidents. Every single one of those presidents, at some point or another, there was a policy that I didn't agree with.
Yep.
But I never lost sight of the pride that I had in the institution and in the work and in the fact that the American flag flew over the place that I worked, where I worked. That's an immense source of pride for all of us, regardless of what our gender or ethnicity or our political preferences are. That's a source of enormous pride, and it is something that we carry with us every day. And when I talk to people who've left the service or who have retired or moved on to do other things, they still speak wistfully of that time when they were in and of what it was like and the pride that they had in their job. So I think the pride comes with the job, regardless of who you are or what you look like. And that is one of the greatest rewards in this career.
Well, on that note, I think we will end. Thank you so much for
a
your
pleasure.
time. This was so great.